Hi everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Tarot Course series offered to you by 1millionnights.com. In the previous video, we examined the very first card of the tarot, the Fool, so the next one is naturally the Magician. Now, before we get into its possible meanings, interpretations, different positions, different combinations, we have to take a look at the philosophy behind the Magician card bearing the number 1, which in numerology is a very, very relevant number because it represents the new beginning manifested. Now, if the Fool was just setting up for its journey, for this wonderful new beginning, that was the very, very first step. So basically, it was just an intention, but this is where the Fool has already begun his journey. He is already walking the path, and he already has a certain kind of mastery, a know-how, basic knowledge over everything that he possibly needs to know. This is where his curiosity is beginning to be satisfied, because he is studying, but in a very, very practical manner, because he is also experimenting, applying his knowledge. He is researching and, of course, working towards accomplishing everything that he needs for this journey to continue. But it is not just outer mastery, for example, mastery over the elements, that the Fool, now the Magician, has to practically apply, but it is also inner mastery, where self-knowledge, many times it's way more important than exterior knowledge. So as the Fool, now the Magician, experiments, researches, studies on how reality is built, how the universe functions, the delicate balance, correlation between the 5 elements. Naturally, how understanding how the universe functions, how everything is basically built, is the key to achieving your desire, is the key towards manifestation. But at the same time, that isn't really enough, because a magician also needs to understand its own role, its own purpose in the universe. So that represents self-psychoanalysis, understanding and knowing how its own psychology functions, how it works, basically the inner cosmos. So from this perspective, the magician is no longer inexperienced, so there is a lot of mastery, knowledge, learned and lived experience attached to this card. So we can say that the magician is already a master, but at the same time, the magician is an eternal student of the universe, of the cosmos. So its studies are basically never ever going to end, not even when its earthly existence ends. Because this is the beauty of the journey, and this is why everything works in cycles, because when you already master, when you have superiority over, let's say, a paradigm, then a new one, a new challenge, the higher version of that is the next step to follow. And this goes on and on and on in cycles, and that is why most graphic representations of the magician have that infinity symbol, because the journey towards mastery, knowledge, learning never ever ever ends. And also, that is why in certain tarot decks, the magician is not really named magician, but rather alchemist, because what the magician does is the essence, the philosophy basically which governs alchemy. Now, a very important element is the astrological correspondent of the magician. Like every tarot card has an astrological correspondent, because that is basically what it is built on. So we cannot really ignore the astrology behind it, even though some people don't really use the astrological elements associated with the tarot. But even if you do not practically use it, it is always good to know the governing energy behind the tarot card. Now, the Fool was governed by Uranus, and the Magician is governed by Mercury. And this is a very interesting situation because Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. So naturally, wouldn't it be more natural for the Fool to be Mercury and then the Magician Uranus? Because to the rational mind it would seem like a downgrade, but it isn't really so, because Uranus is the ultimate, it is the most divine truth and knowledge, intelligence, information, call it whatever you want, that cannot exist in perfect form in our earthly sphere, not even in the more elevated cosmic spheres. But it can exist in the unconscious mind, and that is the Fool. The initiative, the potential, the talent, the divine seed, so to speak, is there, but it cannot be manifested because there is no link between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. The Magician, however, builds that bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, and that is the symbolism of Mercury, because it is Uranus, as in the most divine truth, but applied very, very practically. This is where we actually have control over it, and that control is offered to us through research, through study, through rationalizing everything, even if we have to embody the lower expression of it, but physical reality, matter, manifested divine sphere, is basically just the very, very dense earthly vibration of the spirit. So the Magician can only have power over it if he understands the divine rules, the earthly rules, and how those two function when they meet. And their meeting point is exactly this earthly sphere. So the power of the Magician is his mind, because it is the mind which allows him to combine the four elements in different ways. And that is exactly why in most tarot cards the Magician is represented as the figure of the Magician standing in front of an altar where he has the symbol of the four elements, the sword, that is the intellectual element, the cup, it is the world of emotions, the wand, the force of will, passion, the element of fire, and naturally the pentacle, which is the earth. Yet we must not forget about the symbol of infinity, because that is perfectly valid in the inner universe as well. So as above, so below, as within, so without. And this is exactly the essence of the Magician, because by mastering the inner forces, it can change outer reality, and when it's needed, or when the situation requires it, naturally it is perfectly valid the other way around, when it is changes, reconfigurations of external reality that influence the inner reality. Now, other tarot decks picked the Magician as either Hermes, Mercury, a divine messenger, the divine scribe, so to speak. And that is because our own intelligence is basically a reflection of the divine intelligence, and vice versa. Every major idea, epiphany, plan, inspiration sources from the divine spheres, and naturally vice versa. Our own mental construct, so to speak, can many times influence the divine spheres, especially when we talk about our own life, our own reality, our own destiny. So the choices that we make and how we apply our plans, how we go after our goals matter very, very much. Because we are not simply puppets of the divine sphere, where whatever happens up there in the heavens has to be strictly enacted down here on earth. We also have a great saying in how things are going to let's say, take place or how they're going to manifest through the choices that we make and what we align to. The pattern has to be enacted, but how, when, why, in which circumstances, many times depends very much on us, and that is exactly why the magician has to study the divine spheres and the earthly sphere as well. Because only when the two are aligned, when the two are in harmony with each other, well, that is when, the flow can take place. Mercury, the planet of the mind, is the energy which can actually align us to the flow of the cosmos, because when our minds are connected, then our whole beings are connected, but that connection needs to be perfected, refined, and ultimately preserved, because if it falls into chaos, well, then we immediately are thrown out of the flow. So discipline, mastery, rationality, the light of our intellect and logic is basically the key towards a successful magician. But of course, the magician works with trial and error. Its life, its existence, its work is a continuous experimentation, because that is the only way he can learn, he can practice, and he can go even higher. So mistakes, flaws, errors, misjudgment is a perfectly natural and actually positive part of this process. You cannot know the light without darkness, so to speak. Now let's take a look what the magician actually symbolizes in a tarot reading, because all of what I've said earlier is basically just the philosophy behind it, and many times it is not that much relevant. But what always is very relevant, when the magician card appears in any circumstance, any reading, well, it symbolizes that the power is in the mental sphere, the mind, communication maybe, intellectual process, mind over matter. And when I say mind over matter, it doesn't necessarily have to mean anything magical, metaphysical, the occult. It can simply mean that the key to success, the key to accomplishment, the key to get what you need, what you desire, what you plan on, lies in your plans, in your intellectual capabilities, in the fertility of your thoughts and mind, in the balance that you hold mentally, the know-how, the experience, what you have learned and studied, how you can apply that very practically. So for example, if you would ask a question, what you need to do to advance with your career or your job, and the magician pops out, well, it can represent that you need to basically keep on acquiring knowledge, experience, keep on doing what you're doing, because as you grow in mastery, for example, certain activities that you need to do on a daily basis, well, they can just neurological patterns, which means that your body, your physical being, can just do them, perform them on autopilot, because you have repeated those activities so very many times that you just simply know out of reflex, out of instincts, what you need to do without allocating that much mental energy and focus. And that makes you extremely efficient. That also makes you a very good teacher, manager, guide for others, for example, other inexperienced colleagues. It basically turns you into a key figure in the company, job, or whatever. So it can simply tell you, keep on doing what you're doing, learn, experience, do not be afraid or shy to take on challenging situations. For example, try out new roles, experiment with maybe duties which aren't your speciality, because everything is a valid source of experience, and it just makes you stronger, it just makes you more intelligent, more knowledgeable. So we get back to its original symbolism, mind over matter, and it's very practical, very down to earth expression, Because if you know what you're doing, if you understand how things function, well, your mind and your intellectual capabilities can help you enact your will, do whatever it is that you want to do. Now, from a spiritual perspective, its symbolism, its meaning, its message is very, very similar. Practice, hold the frequency, work with your mental sphere, make sure that your mind is clean, make sure that your thoughts don't attempt to defeat you. Always apply rationality and logic to every situation, even if it's spiritual in nature, because spirituality does have a lot of logic to it, but sometimes that logic is based on faith, so it is a non-linear kind of logic. So this is how we have to adapt mind over matter, or learned experience, knowledge, know-how to every single situation, because that is the key to success, to completion, to victory, or whatever nature your question has. It is perfectly valid even in matters of the heart, love, relationships. For example, if you ask the tarot deck what to do in regards with a person, maybe someone who you sympathize, a crush, well, it can be an indication that the very first step that you need to do is get to know that person very, very well, because it is only after that you can decide where you want to take this relationship further. Or example, if you ask the tarot deck what a specific person thinks about you and the magician pops out, well, it can represent that they think that you're very intelligent, very capable, that you master something. Or if this question is in romantic sense, then it can mean that they're attracted to your mind, to your intelligence, to your mystery, so to speak. If your question is what a person is doing or what a person is planning, it can represent that they're putting plans together, that they are just building a strategy, for example. But of course, this is perfectly valid in down-to-earth matters. For example, if your question is, how do you achieve something? It can be anything, something really practical. Well, if the magician pops out, it can be an indication, study the subject, see how other people accomplished it, and apply the same strategies, apply the same schematics. For example, if a chemist wants to create a chemical reaction, well, it simply applies the formula physically, because they understand how that chemical reaction takes place. So it is always an indication to apply practical knowledge, experience, know-how. Use the power and sharpness of your intellect. Now, naturally, the magician also has negative connotations, because regardless of how we look at it, well, the magician is a manipulator. Even in its most positive sense, well, someone who masters the elements is basically manipulating them. Someone who knows how physical reality functions, and when they change something, well, they are manipulating it. And in its most negative sense, maybe the way they are manipulating it, maybe the purpose is not really a beneficial one. It doesn't serve anyone's greater good. But of course, that doesn't mean they won't get what they want, just that after they get it, maybe they have to pay a very high price. It can naturally also mean that there is a flaw in the way of thinking, there is a flaw in knowledge, there is a flaw or imbalance in the tactics. It can also represent, Mercury retrograde, where you have to revise, rethink, reconfigure everything. Maybe it can indicate that something has changed and you have to relearn something, or that you need a totally different kind of experience. And when it comes to a person, well, naturally it means that they are manipulating you, the situation, themselves, but in a not very diligent manner, or if it's on purpose, well, then they accept the price. They accept that, for example, the goal justifies the means. It can also represent that maybe they're cheating, but not in a, romantic or relationship sense, but rather, like a computer game, you enter the cheat code and you immediately achieve something which otherwise would be impossible. So, for example, career-wise, it can represent nepotism, where you just get what you want in a very controversial manner, so to speak. Or if it's, for example, relationship and romance, well, it can represent that your partner or whoever this person is has hidden plans. They are after something in a very indirect manner. They might be deceiving you. They might be manipulating you to get something that they want. So it is always an indication that you do not know everything that there is to it, that you need to be ready for unexpected things to enter your awareness. Now, of course, in very rare and extreme cases, the magician, reversed position, the negative interpretation of the magician can mean like black magic or a magical influence which is not very positive in nature and doesn't have a very positive purpose. But those situations are extremely rare. Usually it represents that actually it is us, the person asking the question, who is the dark magician, because our way of thinking is flawed, or maybe the four elements are very imbalanced. For example, our purpose is vengeance, our purpose is obsessive, we act from a place of self-victimization. So it can basically represent when our way of thinking or when our perceptions are not very clear. Of course, that doesn't mean that we do not get what we want, but there are consequences. Now let's take a look what the magician can represent in different combinations with other cards. But these are, of course, just examples because I can't possibly cover everything. Now, for example, the magician combined with any of the aces is a really, really good sign. It can represent that a seed of intention you have planted some time ago is finally entering your reality one way or another. It can be something that you have planned and it is now coming to fruition, but it can also mean like a divine intervention where it is the universe that offers you the opportunity, the chance, the possibility. Something can manifest in your life, but you need to be aware and seize the opportunity because it is not something that is gonna just fall into your lap. The magician, for example, with the Lovers card, with the Two of Cups, with the Ten of Cups, it can represent the power of your attraction, where it is partners that you attract into your life. It can be romantic partners, it can be business partners, or it can simply be other people who can enable you to get what you want or where you want. The magician combined with the Six of Swords, for example, well, it can mean that you need to be very, very patient because you are learning. You are just in the process of acquiring experience, skill, knowledge, etc. So you need to be patient and perseverant with your plans and strategies or accomplishing whatever that you desire. The magician with, for example, the Moon card, High Priestess, Three of Cups, Four of Cups, or maybe the Fool, it can represent powerful epiphany, dreams, divine guidance, visions, where the universe is steering you in a mysterious way to get where you want to be, or for, fate to trigger. And if it comes to fate, for example, the magician combined with the Wheel of Fortune can represent a very, very lucky opportunity. The magician with the Two of Swords, for example, can represent that you need to choose very, very wisely, or not make a choice until you truly know what you want, what you desire, and what your chances, options, possibilities are. Or, for example, the magician along with the Eight of Swords, for example, or the Eight of Cups, it can represent the freedom of the mind, the freedom of your perceptions, or, through your mind, through your intelligence, getting out of either a bad emotional situation, a bad emotional state, or, for example, a legal situation. But of course, there is the other side of the spectrum. So now let's take a look at one of the more negative representations of the magician combined with other cards. Well, one of the most negative is the magician combined with the devil, because that can represent that someone is intentionally manipulating you, deceiving you, conning you, lying to you, or whatever they present like a situation, or what they tell you, communication, it is untrue or half true. The magician combined with the Ten of Swords, for example, well, that can be a clear indication to abandon your purpose because it simply cannot happen or not going to happen, or you need to accept, surrender, and move on. The magician with the Five of Swords or Seven of Swords, it can represent, for example, either that you're deceiving yourself or your way of thinking is really, really flawed, or it could be maybe another person, a fake friend, or society in general is influencing you in a very negative way, or that you're comparing your situation when you really, really shouldn't do, and that comparison distorts your way of thinking. The magician combined with, for example, the Seven of Wands, Five of Wands, or Nine of Wands can represent that you need to persevere, you need to defend your ground, you need to stand up for yourself, you need to protect your strategy, your plan, your desires, or you need to fight for your situation. And sometimes life requires us to fight with everything that we've got. Sometimes we simply cannot take morality into consideration, especially when our situations are very, very urgent. Or the magician combined with the Ten of Wands can represent, well, that you can accomplish what you want, your plan can work, but it's gonna be really, really hard, or you have to endure a lot or wait a lot. And finally, a very relevant combination, because I do feel that very, very many times this is so true for all of us in certain episodes in our lives, when the magician appears along with the Hangman card, for example, or with the Sun, even though that might not mean a negative representation, well, it can represent that whatever situation we're trying to overcome, whatever limitations we might have in our lives, well, they're not real, they're only our limited perception. Or if it's like a negative event, then it is actually us, either consciously or our unconscious minds, that triggers it. It can mean that we are the mastermind behind our own limitations, so to speak. So whenever these combinations appear, well, it is an indication of we have to wake up from our delusions, our illusions, our, misaligned beliefs or principles or philosophies that don't really serve us. Well, thank you so much for listening. This concludes the second episode, The Magician. Naturally, next week we are going to continue with the third tarot card, the High Priestess. If you'd like a personal reading, just log on to 1millionnights.com and find your dedicated advisor. And also, we have a very special promotion in the month of September, where if you buy any of our prepaid packages, you get 10% bonus credit. Thank you again. Until next time, bye for now.